In his excellent book on becoming a person, Dr. Carl Rogers spelled out some of the characteristics of the new powerful person who is emerging in our culture today, and the vital different set of values he both maintains and lives. I stressed, he writes, his hatred of phoniness, this new person, his hatred of phoniness, his opposition to all rigidly structured institutions, his desire for intimacy, closeness, and community, his willingness to live by new and relatively moral and ethical standards, his searching quality, his openness to his own and others' feelings, his spontaneity, his activism, and his determination to translate his ideals into reality. I'm talking, he wrote, about a relatively small number of people, but I believe that these people constitute the change agents of the future. When some part of a culture is decayed at the core, a small group with new views, new convictions, and a willingness to live in new ways is a ferment that can't be stopped. Let's take a look at that new person emerging in our culture and see if you and I qualify. I'd like to think that the total subscription list of Direct Line is made up of these powerful new emerging people. First, his hatred of phoniness. Our new powerful person sees through facades and tinsel, outmoded and ridiculous customs and beliefs. Free of the tyranny of things and the opinions of others, he and his family, she and her family, live in a kind of solid serenity where true values count, where the verities, things like truth and justice, the family and work, take on real meaning. It is in the avoidance of phoniness that real freedom may be found, and one can drop off the rat race with a great sigh of relief. There are no inner circles to which these people need apply for membership. They are the centers of their own circles. This person is opposed to all rigidly structured, closed institutions. Such institutions are saying, by the fact that they're rigidly structured and closed, we have the answers. We need look no further. This is it. The new powerful person knows that at this early stage of our development, such thinking is infantile. We do not have all the answers about anything. And just as the maturing person is in a stage of growth, of becoming, so is a vital institution. It uses what it has and what it knows as springboards into the future, and assiduously avoids becoming closed and rigidly structured. A good and viable institution, like a self-actualizing person, is always in a state of growth, of becoming. He has a desire for intimacy, closeness, and community, and a willingness to live by new and relative moral and ethical standards. This person has a searching quality and an openness to his own and others' feelings. He's spontaneous, unafraid of what others will say of his enthusiasms and ideas, and is determined to translate his ideas and ideals into reality. Now, of course, these people must constitute a relatively small number of people, a true inner circle, the most important and influential club of human beings on Earth. The qualifications for membership are tough. To meet them takes work, thought, and study, a willingness to find oneself and be oneself, but the perquisites of membership are great indeed. One of them is freedom. Another is joy. One of the world's greatest cartoonists, to my mind, is Fernando Cron. Many years ago, I cut one of his cartoons out of the Reporter, which depicted the entrance and exit to a subway. Coming out of the exit is a crowd of adults. Going down into the entrance is a crowd of children. All the children are laughing and smiling and enjoying themselves. But on the faces of the adults coming out of the subway are expressions of anger, boredom, worry, and not one smile or joyful expression in the lot. There's no caption. None is needed. The cartoon very graphically asks the question, what happened to all of those smiles and happy expressions between the ages of childhood and adulthood? Well, what did happen to them? Are we to say that adult life is so full of sorrow and pain and problems that it cannot be experienced in a consistently happy way? No, in fact, a little later I'm going to give you some statistical data pertaining to happiness, who's happy and why. But this group of powerful people, emerging people in our society, while more aware of the world's problems than 95% of their fellows, still enjoy their lives, and do not belong to that sad group coming out of Fernando Cron's subway. I've stood at the exits of subways and watched the people coming up. Nobody expects them to be doubled over with helpless laughter or skipping and playing like children, but their expressions seem to indicate that life for them is an extremely serious and as yet unfathomed riddle, and they give the impression that they're not growing as persons, and are perhaps, in fact, drawing back, shrinking into their little molds and hardening like concrete. Incidentally, my all-time favorite Fernando Cron cartoon portrays a man on the end of a pier who is obviously bent on suicide. He has a rope tied around his neck with the other end tied around a great stone. In attempting to throw the stone over the end of the pier, all he has accomplished is to drop it on his foot. The cartoon shows him hopping on one foot, holding the injured foot in his hands. The caption of the cartoon is simply incompetence. And if we ever needed proof that the only way to growth and maturity and knowledge lies in the lonely and arduous hours spent alone in thought and study, this thought from the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer should convince us. Truth that has merely been learned is like an artificial limb, a false tooth, a waxen nose. It adheres to us only because it is put on. But truth acquired by thought of our own is like a natural limb. It alone really belongs to us. And if you wonder from time to time why so many of the adults you see and know about you shackle themselves with the outmoded ideas of the past, Schopenhauer also wrote, "There is no absurdity so palpable but that it may be firmly planted in the human head if only you begin to inculcate it before the age of 5 by constantly repeating it with an air of great solemnity." When a child asks his parents what he should be when he grows up, they often, and with the very best of intentions, try to steer him toward a particular calling or profession. I remember my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. When children seek advice, here's a pretty good answer. Look for the truth. Look for the truth in everything. Spend your entire life looking for truth, and you will have spent it as nobly as any human being who ever lived. And the calling that's right for you will come along. Archibald MacLeish wrote, "What is freedom? Freedom is the right to choose, the right to create for oneself the alternatives of choice. Without the possibility of choice and the exercise of choice, a man is not a man, but a member, an instrument, a thing." Dr. Carl Rogers says that responsible personal choice is the most essential element in being a person and is the core experience in psychotherapy. Francis Bacon said, "If a person will begin with certainties, he will end in doubts. But if he will be content to begin with doubts, he will end in certainties." Isn't it true that we try to raise our children to begin with certainties in which we ourselves have no deep and abiding faith? And isn't it also true that most people reach adulthood in frustration and doubt and fear because those childhood certainties have crumbled and fallen apart? Could this be why the people coming out of Fernando Khan's subway appear to be marching to a death camp? Now let me read something to you and see what you think of it. 40,000 years ago, in the bleak uplands of southwestern Asia, a man, a Neanderthal man, once labeled by the Darwinian proponents of struggle as a ferocious ancestral beast, a man whose face might cause you some slight uneasiness if he sat down beside you, a man of this sort existed with a fearful body handicap in that Ice Age world. He had lost an arm, but still he lived and was cared for. Somebody, some group of human things in a hard, violent, and stony world loved this maimed creature enough to cherish him. And looking so across the centuries and the millennia toward the animal men of the past, one can see a faint light, like a patch of sunlight, moving over the dark shadows on a forest floor. It shifts and widens, it winks out, it comes again, but it persists. It is the human spirit, the human soul, however transient, however faulty men may claim it to be. In its coming, man had no part. It merely came, that curious light, and man, the animal, sought to be something that no animal had been before. Cruel he might be, vengeful he might be, but there had entered into his nature a curious, wistful gentleness and courage. It seemed to have little to do with survival, for such men died over and over. They did not value life compared to what they saw in themselves, that strange inner light, which has come from no man knows where, and which was not made by us. It has followed us all the way from the age of ice, from the dark borders of the ancient forest into which our footprints vanish. It is in this that Kierkegaard glimpsed the eternal, the way of the heart, the way of love which is not of today, but is of the whole journey, and may lead us at last to the end. Through this, he thought, the future may be conquered. Certainly it is true. For man may grow until he towers to the skies, but without this light, he's nothing, and his place is nothing. Even as we try to deny the light, we know that it has made us, and what we are without it remains meaningless. We have come a long road up from the darkness, and it well may be, so brief even so is the human story, that viewed in the light of history we are still uncouth barbarians. We are potential love animals, wrenching and floundering in our larval envelopes, trying to fling off the bestial past. That's good, isn't it? It's from the book that belongs in your library and mine, The Firmament of Time, by Loren Eiseley, published by Atheneum. Dr. Eiseley taught anthropology at the University of Kansas and Oberlin College before he was named chairman of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania, where he later became provost. This is the kind of book that helps us grow, that helps us move closer to the truth about ourselves. And here's something we should read or listen to once a day for the next 45 years. It was written back at the turn of the century by William George Jordan. He was editor of several magazines during his lifetime, including the Ladies' Home Journal and the Saturday Evening Post. He wrote, "Calmness is the rarest quality in human life. It is the poise of a great nature, in harmony with itself and its ideals. It is the moral atmosphere of a life self-reliant and self-controlled. Calmness is singleness of purpose, absolute confidence, and conscious power ready to be focused in an instant to meet any crisis. The Sphinx is not a true type of calmness. Petrifaction is not calmness, it's death, the silencing of all the energies. While no one lives his life more fully, more intensely, and more consciously than the person who is calm. The fatalist is not calm. He's the coward slave of his environment, hopelessly surrendering to his present condition, recklessly indifferent to his future. He accepts his life as a rudderless ship drifting on the ocean of time. He has no compass, no chart, no known port to which he's sailing. His self-confessed inferiority to all nature is shown in his existence of constant surrender. It is not calmness. The person who is calm has his course in life clearly marked on his chart. His hand is ever on the helm. Storm, fog, night, tempest, danger, hidden reefs, he's prepared and ready for them. He's made calm and serene by the realization that in these crises of his voyage he needs a clear mind and a cool head. That he has nothing to do but do each day the best he can by the light he has. That he will never flinch nor falter for a moment. That though he may have to tack and leave his course for a time, he'll never drift. He'll get back into the true channel. He'll keep ever headed toward his harbor. When he will reach it, how he will reach it, matters not to him. He rests in calmness, knowing he's done his best. When the worries and cares of the day fret you and begin to wear upon you and you chafe under their friction, be calm. Stop. Rest for a moment, and let calmness and peace assert themselves. If you let these irritating outside influences get the better of you, you're confessing your inferiority to them by permitting them to dominate you. When the tongue of malice and slander, the persecution of inferiority, tempt you to retaliate, when for an instant you forget yourself so far as to hunger for revenge, be calm. When the gray heron is pursued by its enemy, the eagle, it does not run to escape. It remains calm, takes a dignified stand, and waits quietly, facing the enemy unmoved. With the terrific force with which the eagle makes its attack, the boasted king of birds is often impaled and run through on the quiet, lance-like bill of the heron. No person in the world ever attempted to wrong another without being injured in return, some way, somehow, sometime. Remain calm. Now, although that was written at the turn of the century and in language that today might sound a bit affected and archaic, it's a good message. If ever there were a quality needed in the crisis-filled world of today, it's calmness, and the kind of clear thinking calmness produces. Another attribute of that new emerging person we were talking about. I wonder how improved our days would be if we would make it a point to go over that little message every morning. Here's a quotation I like. It's by William Drummond. He who will not reason is a bigot. He who cannot is a fool. And he who dares not is a slave. The distinguished psychologist, the late Dr. Maslow, said something that should be kept in mind by every parent and businessman and executive, teacher, by every person in any sort of position of authority. He said everyone seems to be aware at some level of consciousness of the fact that authoritarian management outrages the dignity of the worker. He then fights back in order to restore his dignity and self-esteem. He will do this actively with hostility and vandalism and the like, or passively as a slave does with all sorts of underhanded, sly, and secretly vicious countermeasures. These reactions are puzzling generally to the dominator, but on the whole they're easily enough understood, and they make very real psychological sense if they're understood as attempts to maintain one's dignity under conditions of domination or of disrespect. In the foreword to his book, If Men Were Angels, Milton Mayer writes of when he was a youngster. His mother would say, "Wear your rubbers." "Oh, gosh, Ma. Don't gosh me. Wear your rubbers." "Why do I have to wear my rubbers?" "Because I say so, that's why." Or to his big brother, "I want you to take care of your little brother this afternoon." "Gosh, Ma, why do I have to take care of him?" "Because I say so, that's why." Now, because I say so has never been a very good reason for doing anything, not as a child and not as a grown-up. Whenever we're faced with arbitrary authority, we burn and rankle. Whether it's a worker, a secretary, a wife, husband, or child, his self-esteem is his most valued possession. If you hurt it, he'll find a way of getting back, of restoring his self-esteem in his own eyes. If not, he will be diminished in his own eyes. The juvenile delinquent, the adult delinquent are examples of this kind of thing. Human beings avoid being manipulated, dominated, pushed around, determined by others, misunderstood. People don't like and will not stand for being a nothing rather than a something, unappreciated, not respected, not feared, not taken seriously, laughed at. People will not tolerate, even though they may appear to be doing so, being ludicrous figures. They don't like being treated as a physical object rather than as a person. As a rule, they don't like to take orders, be forced, used, exploited, controlled. They don't want to feel that they're helpless, compliant, deferent, an interchangeable person. What human beings are seeking is to be prime movers, self-determination, to have control over their own destinies, to determine their own movements, to expect success, to be active rather than passive, to be a person rather than a thing, to have others acknowledge their capabilities fairly. To succeed as a manager of others, in getting along with people generally and our families, we must avoid anything that tends to diminish another person's self-esteem, because people must then find a way to build it back up, and will generally do it in a negative fashion. They will strike back at us directly or indirectly. People will willingly follow the direction of another who directs them in such a fashion as to bolster, or at least keep intact, their feelings of self-esteem. And one of the ways to keep good employees is to keep the level of noise to the absolute minimum. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "The amount of noise anyone can bear undisturbed stands in inverse proportion to his mental capacity, and may therefore be regarded as a pretty fair measure of it." Noise is a torture to all intellectual people. A good indication of the truth of that can be observed by watching children grow up. In their first few grades, they shout at each other constantly at the very top of their lungs. Anyone who has had to take a small child to a children's matinee can attest to that, or listen to them on the school playground. As they move up in the grades, though, the noise level drops, and even in a class of very young people, it's generally thought to be true that the quietest children are the more intelligent. And finally, young people in their teens are far quieter than children of 7 or 8, except when it comes to their music. The more intelligent a person becomes, the more his voice will diminish in volume. The quiet, controlled voice is infinitely more effective when dealing with others, small children included. Shouting or loud talking is almost always a sign of inferiority, real or imagined. It hurts the ears and grates on the nerves and causes real fatigue. People who tend to raise their voices when they get angry should try to do just the opposite. They'd be far more effective and would tend to retain better control of themselves. A person's intelligence can be said to be in inverse proportion to the amount of noise he can tolerate. A couple of my acquaintance with 3 small children bought a second-hand limousine with a glass divider between the front and back seats. On long trips, they simply roll it up and drive along in blissful peace and quiet, while the kids play, scream, and fight in the back seat. I visited an interesting company in Dallas, Texas some time back, whose offices, even though they required several floors of a large office building, had only about 3 traditional offices as such. They were offices, I believe, for the president, the chairman of the board, and the conference room. All the other people occupied spaces surrounded by movable modules. Telephone and electrical cables came down from the ceiling. Now, the entire floors were deeply carpeted with good acoustical material on the ceilings. There was a marvelous silence about the place. After a trial period, the people were polled as to their opinion of the new setup, and they were virtually unanimous in their acceptance of it. It's very difficult to imagine an intelligent, thoughtful, poised person making a lot of noise, shouting or losing control. A person should speak just loudly enough to be heard clearly under all circumstances. A distinguished American psychotherapist has said that no one, as far as we know, is born neurotic. We learn to become neurotic as a result of our upbringing. We are raised by other human beings, and they literally teach us to become neurotic. If a child is raised to believe that intelligence and beauty are worthwhile traits, and that he is bright and handsome, well, he will tend to look upon himself as good and to have a favorable self-concept. But if he's raised to believe that he is stupid and ugly, he will tend to look upon himself as bad and to have a poor self-concept. Our early self-concepts depend upon the concepts that others have toward us. If those who are important in the life of a child generally blame him, he will learn to blame himself. If they consistently accept him, he will learn to accept himself. That does not mean that the self-concept a child first learns is absolutely final and crucial. He can, later in life, change it for better or worse, but it's hard. And this early self-concept is most important, and it does tend to set the pattern for later attitudes and behavior. I read somewhere that self-confidence is like a psychological credit card, and I can still remember my mother telling me that I could do anything I set my heart upon. To tell a youngster he or she is great is to give him the kind of self-image he needs to build a meaningful life for himself. Youngsters will discover their limitations, their blind spots, the areas in which they have little or no aptitude soon enough without our help. Self-confidence is a kind of psychological credit card, and is of far greater value than any other we can carry. When we see someone who is neurotic, it should elicit our sympathy in the realization that the person was not born that way. He was taught to be neurotic by his elders. Neuroses are like chains that are put on children to hinder them in their development and activities. If you'd like to examine yourself for traces of neurosis, Dr. Albert Ellis, in his book How to Live with a Neurotic, gives us a list of popular beliefs, irrational ideas, really, each of which indicates a neurosis. You can check your own against the list. Remember, each of the following statements is false and indicates a neurosis. An adult must be approved of or loved by almost everyone for almost everything he does. What others think of him is most important. Depending on others is better than depending upon oneself. A person should be thoroughly competent, adequate, talented, and intelligent in all possible respects. The main goal and purpose of life is achievement, success. Incompetence in anything whatsoever is an indication that a person is inadequate or valueless. One should blame oneself severely for all mistakes and wrongdoings. Punishing oneself for errors will help prevent future mistakes. A person should blame others for their mistaken or bad behavior. He should get upset by the errors and stupidities of others. One should spend considerable time and energy trying to reform others. One can best help others by roundly criticizing them and sharply pointing out the error of their ways. Because a certain thing once strongly affected one's life, it should indefinitely affect it. Because a person was once weak and helpless, he must always remain so. Because parents or society taught the acceptance of certain traditions, one must go on unthinkingly accepting these traditions. If things are not the way one would like them to be, it is a catastrophe. Things should be better than they are. Other people should make things easier for us, help with life's difficulties. No one should have to put off present pleasures for future gains. Avoiding life's difficulties and self-responsibilities is easier than facing them. Inertia and inaction are necessary and or pleasant. One should rebel against doing things, however necessary, if doing them is unpleasant. Much happiness is externally caused or created by outside persons and events. A person has virtually no control over his emotions and cannot help feeling bad on many occasions. If something is or may be dangerous or injurious, one should be seriously concerned about it. Worrying about a possible danger will help ward it off or decrease its effect. Well, how did you do? That was a list of beliefs indicating neurosis. Getting back to our saying that self-confidence is a kind of psychological credit card, I don't think enough has been said about the power of positive expectation. It's truly amazing, and there's simply no explaining it. When we confidently expect something worthwhile to materialize in our lives, it invariably does. It works like pure, unadulterated magic. It gives each of us a kind of magic wand with which we can bring all sorts of interesting and rewarding events and things into our lives. Those who have cultivated this power, who consciously and actively work at it, regularly do the most amazing things. As with neurosis, we're often taught as youngsters to expect the worst. We have so often heard people say, "Well, with my luck, the whole deal will fall through," indicating that their luck is usually bad. How many times have we heard someone say, "If you don't expect to succeed, you won't be disappointed," and "learn to be content with what you get"? On giveaway television programs, we watch young people, playing it safe. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I read a financial column in the Miami Herald the other day in which a young man of just 20 wrote of his losses in a mutual fund and commented that he'd been unable to sleep and he'd lost weight over it. The columnist commented that he should never risk his money. He should put it in the bank or the savings and loan where he knows it's safe. I think it's safe to say that the majority of people have a suspicious and negative outlook toward those life situations which, to an intelligent minority, represent virtually unlimited opportunities. Now, this is not to say that positive and expectant people do not occasionally lose money in their investments or have problems. I'm sure they do. It's just that it doesn't bother them the way it seems to bother most people. And over the long haul, well, they're miles ahead of the pack. They face their days with an attitude that expects the best, and that's what they're going to get as long as they can maintain it. What others worry and stew about, they confidently expect a successful outcome, and most of the time they get it. If you have trouble maintaining this powerful force for good in your life, a reminder card, placed where you'll see it every morning when you get up and at odd times during the day, can help you get on course and form a very valuable new habit.